Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar Lunch and Learn on 3 steps to building a smart marketing plan. Before we get started, I want to cover some basic housekeeping. We are recording this webinar, and we do want this to be interactive. And you've got both a chat window and a Q&A window. And as we present today, please feel free to input your questions into that chat window or the Q&A, and we're going to do our best to get to all your questions. We're going to run from 12 o'clock to about 1 o'clock, and so we really want to try and do our best to address all your questions. And to kind of talk about where this webinar was born, Rachel, Durkan, and I have known each other for quite a few years. Paradigm has been instrumental in helping to build the C3 Workplace brand. And what I know for sure as a business owner who's built a company that runs without me is you need a written plan. That written plan is your roadmap. That written plan holds you accountable to your focus, and it does keep you focused on those things that drive your business forward. And for C3 Workplace, one of those things is collaboration. The C3 stands for Connect, Collaborate, Community. So I am delighted, as always, to be collaborating with the fantastic Rachel Durkan from Paradigm Marketing and Design, who will be your instructor today. So Rachel, take it away.
All right, thank you. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Donna, for the introduction. So today we're going to talk about the 3 steps to developing a marketing plan. Before we get into it, I just want to, I want to be very clear that this information might seem a little bit overwhelming. We're going to cover quite a bit, but Donna always says to me that everything, things that you actually know become easy over time as you get to know them. So this is going to seem complicated, but it's certainly going to get easier as we go over things. So try not to feel overwhelmed, and feel free to ask questions as we go, and we'll answer them all at the end. So let's get started. I want to start with a case study. We have a client that is an independent financial advisory firm, and they're not small. They manage about $800 million in assets. They have great brand awareness. They have great PR. Their owner does interviews on Fox and Reuters. So they have a great reputation in the marketplace as being very knowledgeable. They brought us in because they wanted to increase their revenue 20% over the next 2 years. And their challenge is that they were getting quite a few clients to call them because of all the PR they had, but the people who were calling them weren't necessarily their right target audience, and they were only able to convert about 10% of their leads. So we came in and we did a deep dive, and we did some market research, and we asked them to give us their top 10 or 20 clients so that we could interview them. And what we found was really interesting. After we interviewed them, we realized that most of their ideal audience was not very educated in the financial sector. They didn't really understand the ins and outs of the stock market or investment strategies, and that's the way our client liked it. They wanted to be able to provide guidance to people who didn't necessarily want to understand. They just wanted somebody to trust. And it was interesting, though, because everything they were speaking to, all of the messages they were communicating, all the outlets they were talking to were to a very educated audience. So they were saying the wrong thing to the wrong people. And in fact, the message they were communicating when they were talking in these publications were going way over the heads of their target audience. So we actually came in and shifted their entire messaging strategy, everything they were saying, everything they were writing. We kind of dumbed it down a little bit for their ideal audience and changed the communication outlets to reach those people. And what happened is the inbound leads stayed about the same over the next year. So there was no crazy increase in inbound leads, but the closing rate went from like 10% to 50% because we were saying the right thing to the right audience. So keep in mind, as we're talking, that's really the point of this marketing strategy, is you have to be sure you're saying the right thing to the right audience.
Absolutely. And Rachel, I just wanted to jump in there and say, some of you on this webinar may hear 800 million in assets and kind of feel like, well, that's not me. But the truth is, as Rachel went through that case study, projecting and seeking to get a 20% growth in 2 years is something we should all look to do. And you're right. Pure profit is in increasing your conversion rate. So driving the right leads makes all the difference.
Absolutely. And I'm going to have some examples. This is relative no matter the size of your business. And I'll talk about some examples as we go. So Forbes magazine published an article that talked about the top 5 reasons 8 out of 10 businesses fail. And the first 3 that I have in red here directly correlate to the marketing strategy and a plan. So not being in touch with your customers through deep dialogue, no real differentiation, failure to communicate your value proposition. Those 3 things are critical to business success, and we're going to talk about how a written marketing plan can answer all of those questions. So these are the 3 steps that we're going to discuss. First step is understanding your audience, then developing your message strategy, what are you saying, and then the communications plan or the go-to-market plan, we call it. And if I use the term go-to-market plan, I'm using them interchangeably between communications plan and go-to-market plan. Okay. Oops. So, okay, the first step is the audience and the environment. So when we say understanding your target audience, you've probably heard this before. You want to know the DNA of your customer. That could be their age, their gender, where they live, how educated they are. So that's kind of like the demographic DNA. When you have a B2C or your business to consumer company, it's kind of a more simpler audience DNA. It's about the person. Do they have kids? How old are they? Where do they hang out? If you're a B2B and you're going after businesses, you add another layer to that because you have to not only identify the demographics of your audience, but what size business are you going after? What industry are you going after? What position, what person in what position are you going after? And then the customer DNA. But as the market has changed, our communication outlet opportunity has changed with social media, we're able to much more focus on the emotional DNA of our audience. And that's really important. It's always been about the emotional DNA, but we've never really been able to capitalize on it or access it. So emotional DNA is what are they feeling at that particular moment? It can be a pain point. Like, I'll give you an example of a smaller company that we work with, is a family law practice. And we know just from cyclical data that in December, everybody wants to get divorced, but nobody ever actually gets divorced. So like the number of divorces that get filed in December plummets. And that's because nobody wants to get divorced around the holidays. But it dramatically increases in January and February because people get through the holidays, they had a miserable time with their spouse, and they want to get divorced. And we see this year over year. So we ran a campaign for a client. It was like a blitz campaign in December to get free consults for divorce consultations. And if you signed up by the 31st, the consult fee, which is usually a couple $100s, was waived. And they got, in a 1-week campaign just on social media, we got 15 new consults, which is pretty, for that type of audience, is pretty good. Now, we probably would have never gotten that in January because the pain point is different. They're already seeking, or in February or March. The pain is very high in December. So you want to consider the emotional DNA of your audience. What is driving them? What are their pain points? What solution are they seeking? And so those are the types of things that we need to uncover in our research. We'll talk more about that.
Absolutely. And the thing I want to add in there is, those of you who know me know I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, and Simon Sinek is very accurate when he says people do business with why you do what you do more so than what you do. And that falls under the emotional DNA category because Rachel mentioned pain. And the unfortunate truth is that people will make a change because of pain many, many, many more times greater than they will make a change for pleasure. So part of that emotional DNA is the why. Why is there pain, and what is the pain? And sometimes it's an event that drives that, or it could just be hopes, fears, dreams, those types of emotions. So really important point there.
Thanks. So yeah, exactly. So what we need to uncover is what are their pains? What are their buying behaviors? And how do they manage that pain in their search for a solution? So how do we do that? So there's 2 types of research we usually run. One is you ask. So setting up client interviews, just like we did in that case study that I discussed. So we want to set up interviews with current clients, usually the ideal client is the perfect person to interview, but also past clients, lost clients, vendors, partners. And we're going to talk about those interview questions and what we're asking in a second. The second part of the research process is the competitive analysis. So looking at what's happening in the competitive environment and understanding how your competitors are positioning themselves to the target audience. So I'm going to jump over this slide and I'm going to dig a little bit deeper onto each side. So let me kind of break down what we like to do in the interview process is discovery questions. And these types of questions, the goal is to uncover their pain points and their buying behaviors. And what I mean by buying behaviors is how do they start to search for a solution to that pain? What's the process? How long does it take? Is it an immediate search? You know, I have a client who is an attorney for criminal cases or DUIs, for example. Somebody gets a DUI, they need to find a lawyer pretty quickly, or they're in trouble criminally, they need to find a lawyer pretty quickly. The buying process is much shorter. But going back to that example I talked to you about with the family law, the buying process to get a divorce is much longer. They're doing a lot more research. They're doing a lot more emotional soul searching. So that's a different buying process. So we want to understand what that process is, how they go about searching for solutions, how long it takes, where they're searching for solutions. That's the type of information we're trying to uncover. And in this discovery process, we also want to ask questions like, who else did you look at? What other competitors did you consider? How does our organization stack up to those competitors? Have you ever used a different competitor, and how do we compare? I also like to, in this discovery process, ask if there's anything, assuming these are clients, is there anything that we as an organization should be doing different, or that they wish that we did, or is there a hole in the marketplace that is not being met that they wish was being met? That's a great opportunity if we can find some answers to that. These interviews usually last about 20 minutes. I highly recommend they're done on the phone because people are much more honest when they can't see you. I also recommend that you try to get somebody that they don't know, either in your organization or a colleague or a strategic partner, to do these interviews, because they tend to be more honest when they're not speaking to you directly. Donna, do you have anything to add to the interview?
I completely agree, and I think that, you know, as we're looking at these questions, not only does this start to develop your DNA, but ultimately, and I know you're going to talk about this becomes part of your sales process, because you end up turning these into questions that you already know the answer for, and it moves your process along much quicker.
For sure. So switching over to the competitive analysis. Now, some people you might know already who your competitors are. You might say, oh, I always come up against this person in the sales process, or I really want to emulate this person. This is like the leader in the marketplace. But you also keep in mind, as you did your interviews, you were asking about competition. So sometimes competitors come up that you weren't even aware of. So when you're doing your competitive analysis, you want to look at their website. You want to look at their social media. You want to look at their marketing materials. And now, this is something important to consider. Remember, in the sales funnel or the marketing funnel, people are looking initially, when they're comparing you against your competition, at a high level. They're looking at what you're saying about yourself on your website, when they first meet you, at that first touch. So while if you drill down, there might be a more core differentiating factor when they're actually working with you. If you're not talking about it at this high level, they're not going to see that. So really what matters is what's being said on this first or second layer of your audience doing exploration. So I think Donna has an example here, and I'm going to let her, you want to share it, Donna?
Yeah, I do, because I think it's so important, and you were pivotal in helping us to develop this. But, you know, I've been in Montclair here for 25 years, and about 2.5 years ago, Regis opened up literally a half mile from me, and I had been competing against them for years, I had a pretty general idea of what our differentiating factors were, and what their competitive position was. But I was competing with them when they were, you know, in different towns. And through a Google alert, which is a great way to keep track of your competitors, I found out that they were coming to Montclair probably 1.5 years before they opened. And I have to say my first response was, an expletive. I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to deal with this? But Rachel and I talked, and the truth was we did a little more competitive analysis, and I had heard time and time again as people toured my facilities the differences they perceived between our two facilities. So what we ended up doing was we used that differentiating messaging in the very beginning of our tour, and we reinforced it. And you know, I'm happy to say that up until this point, having them a half mile away has been a non-factor for us because we know how we're different. So for us, it was a great example of knowing your competition and what differentiates you.
Exactly. So you also want to look at what are they doing really well that you might want to emulate, and what are they doing not so well that you should probably stay away from. The other thing that these analyses can help you with is look at who their target audiences are. Who are they going after? Because are you missing an opportunity, or is there an audience that's not being met that you should consider? So these are the kind of the high levels of what you're looking for when you're doing this analysis. And Donna and I are going to talk in a little bit about a course that we're running in a couple months, and we're going to give away or provide tools and templates for how to go over a competitive analysis and do one together, and that should be really helpful.
Agreed.
Okay, so now you've done all your market research, you've talked to your audience, you understand their buying behaviors, and you're going to start with your message strategy. So I want to be clear, the difference between your message strategy and your mission statement. A mission statement is internal, it's really for internal use. This is what we want to achieve. This is our kind of, it ties to your vision. It's really an internal statement to propel the organization forward. Your messaging strategy is your way of communicating your value propositions and your differentiators to your target audience in a way that will resonate with them. And that is really important. It has to be said in a way that's going to that they're going to be able to understand. And I'll give you an example here. I have a client that is a cultural consultant. And when he came to me, he was working with much larger organizations, and he wanted to pivot into the small, mid-sized business market. And he kept referring to himself as a cultural consultant. And he was wondering why he wasn't getting any business. The challenge is that he was not speaking to his audience's pain point. They didn't understand how a cultural consultant could impact to create their solution. And he needed to pivot. The challenge the business owners were having were that they weren't able to retain employees, that their retention was poor, that the mood in the office was poor, and it was creating inefficiencies, and people weren't driving through and doing their job, and they didn't have any motivation. And now when he pivoted his message to saying, when you improve your culture, we can help you retain employees, increase retention strategies, etc. When he communicated how his solution his service could be their solution, it changed everything. So you have to really think about how you're communicating your solution to your audience.
Right, and I think that becomes incredibly even more important when you are providing a service that is innovative, because there needs to be some education, and that's where you have to tap into the why do they need this, and like you said, the motivator there is probably, and very often in many cases, is pain. And I agree that, you know, I am a huge proponent of making sure you're clear on your mission, values, vision statement, but that is the barometer for which you build your messaging strategy.
Okay. So the question becomes, how do I organize this data? You know, you have pages and pages of data. You've written through the answers to your interview questions. You have all these different these competitor templates. And how do you organize this content now so it becomes meaningful? And I like to break it out into 3 buckets, so to speak. The first is the business change or opportunity that you might want to consider. So this data is not always, you don't always find data to this. Sometimes we find information like, oh my gosh, there's a market opportunity here that we didn't consider, or there's a solution that, that was brought up a couple times in our interviews that we're not providing that we should, or there's an audience that's not being served that we need to capitalize on. So that's a great thing to consider. And that sometimes like it forces you to consider business changes or new service lines, which can be a really good thing. The second two buckets are related directly to the marketing plan. So the messaging insights, I try to write down all of the things that our audience found valuable. So those are our value propositions. And I'll talk to you about how we find differentiators in a second. But you're going to write down every single thing that your target audience said that you did really well, or the reason they chose you over the competition. Those become your value propositions. Those are things that you have to talk about because that's clearly what your audience finds valuable. The third bucket is your communication strategy. So we want to identify all the outlets. So remember when we asked them what was your, buying when you were searching for solutions, where were you searching? Was it the internet? Was it social media? Was it email marketing that you seeked out? So what were the different communication outlets that you were hanging out in when you were looking for this information? And outlining the buying process. How long was it? Where did they seek information? Was it word of mouth? What were the different steps they took in the buying process? What was the emotional buy? So those are the things that you're kind of writing down in these buckets. So, sorry, go ahead, Donna.
No, I was just thinking, you're starting to get into the meat of it, and having worked with you many times before and even taught with you, I want to reiterate what Rachel said in the beginning. Things are overwhelming when you don't know how to do them. And when you know how to do them, they are incredibly easy. And one of the things I think is really important is, Rachel just referenced having pages and pages of information, and some of us, our eyes start to roll back in our head and we're like, oh, we can't deal with all that. But here's what I know for sure. In order to make really good business decisions, you have to have data. And in order to have data, you have to have those pages and pages of information, because many business owners that are not as successful as they can be are making decisions on a surface level, relying too much on their instincts. I very much believe in listening to your instincts, but if you can combine that with this deep data, you're really setting yourself up for success. So it's the foundational work that really pays off, although sometimes when you're in the middle of it, and I speak from experience, it doesn't quite feel that way, but trust me, hang in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now the question becomes, how do you get to your differentiating concept? So we have your value propositions, and then you've got your competitors' value propositions. So going back to writing down all that data, you wrote down all your value propositions. Now you need to go back and look at the competitive analysis and write down all your competitors' value propositions. What do they say on their website and in their social media outlets that they do really well? And you have to think of this as an offense versus defense. Your defense is your value proposition. You have to talk about them. Your audience finds that valuable. It's very important that you communicate that you do that, because they only are going to work with you if you provide this. However, other people probably also provide those things. So not having it as an inhibitor, but having it might not necessarily take you to the next level. So what we usually do is it's almost like a math equation. We write down all our value propositions, then we write down all our competitors' value propositions that we uncovered, and anything that we do that our competitors don't do becomes our differentiating concept. And that differentiator is your offense. That is what you kind of lead when you go to market with. You certainly communicate your value props, but you also lead with your differentiating concept.
Well said, Rachel. The other way I've seen you do this, and the way we've done it, is all your value props are in one column with all your competitors' value props in a second column, and you line them up. So you see the ones on top you both have, and then you start to see the differentiators where the two columns are no longer in alignment.
Correct. Yeah. I just made it prettier with an infographic.
You did.
Yeah. Your way makes more sense. All right. So this is kind of the messaging strategy. So picture, a chart here. So at the end of the day, you're going to come out with this one-page document. You have all this data, and you've gone through it, and this is the document you come out with. And at the top it says, here's who we are. Here is our differentiating concept. And then here are our 3 marketing messages or our value propositions underneath it. And the reason I wrote it down, Donna eloquently mentioned this, that if you don't write it down, it's
Right.
not going to happen. So you're going to write this chart down, and this becomes your messaging Bible. This is everything, every piece of communication that you go out to market with reinforces one of these messages or your differentiating concept. And if it doesn't, don't talk about it. And that can be reinforced through thought leadership. It can be reinforced through a Facebook post. It can be reinforced through an education series. But it must reinforce your messaging strategy.
Now, Rachel, let me ask a question. And by the way, continue to type your questions into the chat and the Q&A, and we will cover them at the end of the webinar. But I have a question here. Do you create a messaging chart because many of our audience, and myself included, you can have different target markets. Do you have a messaging strategy for each target market?
So the answer to that is it depends. We generally want to have one core messaging strategy, just like you have one mission statement for the organization.
Okay.
You certainly want one messaging strategy overall.
Okay.
It will certainly, those three marketing messages might vary. So you might have like sub-messaging strategies. So you have one as an organization as a whole, and then you have a separate one for target markets. Now, if you're a much bigger organization in a perfect world, like think like Toys R Us and Babies R Us, they're the same company, but they're two different brands. So they have two different messaging strategies.
Gotcha.
The challenge with that is when you have two different messaging strategies and you have two different, similar audiences, they cross market off each other, it's a lot more money because now you're running two marketing plans. So I usually encourage small businesses or middle-sized companies to try to focus on one messaging strategy for the organization and then do sub-strategies, niche markets. But if you have two very different brands, then yes, you need two different messaging strategies.
Gotcha. Thank you.
It becomes is it worth the effort for the return based on the size of the company?
Got it.
Okay. So the communications plan. So we know on average it takes 9 to 13 touches to reach your audience. And that's actually gone up in recent years. I used to say 7 to 11, but it turns out, we're getting more and more saturated with information. So a touch can be any sort of interaction with your target audience. It can be an email communication. It can be a salesperson going to market. It can be the website. But here's the important thing. Every one of those touches must reinforce your messaging strategy. Because if that's broken, if something else is inserted, some other message is inserted, it kind of breaks the process and you lose the audience. So it's very important when you're sick of talking about your message, that's when it's working because you have to say it so many times. And that's why it's important that everybody in the organization understand your messaging strategy. But what's more important here, or equally important, is that our goal in marketing, depending on what you're selling, is not to drive users to a conversion immediately. It's to drive users to the next touch. So you want to get people into this marketing funnel and push them through the funnel with multiple touches, and then ultimately they will become a client or a brand advocate. But you can't go in assuming that you're going to hit them once and get an immediate conversion in most cases.
Agreed. And just, one thing I always see people do is there's this assumption if you say it once, people hear it, and that just couldn't be farther from the truth. So, the 9 to 13, I think used to be 5 to 7 and 7 to 11, and I honestly think it's just going to continue to go up. Yeah,
exactly. I'm sure it will. Okay, so before we talk about the communications plan, and I'm going to pre-warn you that there's going to be a lot of kind of data organization we're going to talk about. But that's the whole point of the plan, and we're going to break it down for you. We want to figure out what our goals are. So first we always consider our business goals long-term. What do we want to achieve? And I'm going to refer to long-term as 1 to 3 years. What do we want to achieve in 1 to 3 years? That's usually revenue focused. We want to get to $1 million. We want to get to $2 million. We want to get to $500,000. But then we need to break out, okay, what are the areas of the business, usually operations, marketing, and finance, what are those areas going to need to do to help us get to that goal? Because just marketing is not going to do it. You have to do, obviously, operations and finance. Everything has to support one another. So That's usually the midterm goal. So a marketing goal might be, okay, I want to start generating 10 new clients a month in order to achieve my longer term revenue goal. Or the operations goal might be, I need to scale up to 2 more employees in order to support the new clients that are coming in from marketing. So that's kind of your midterm goal. But then you have to break it down even more granular, and I call this KPIs, or key performance indicators. What are the small actions that need to be taken in order to achieve this 10 new clients that you want a month? So what social media actions need to be taken, and how do we benchmark that success in the short term? What web actions, email communications, etc. And so to kind of help you conceptualize this, I'm sure all of you have seen this very famous painting, and it's done, I had to Wikipedia this, but it's called pointillism that it's done with. And there's thousands and thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of dots that are individually put into this painting of different colors to make this image. And that's kind of the concept of marketing. It's thousands and thousands of little touches that come together because they're all communicating the same message to create an impact. So my point is that every communication reinforces your strategies, and you need to break down KPIs, or those key performance indicators, to measure if you're actually being successful to achieve your longer term plan, because it's very hard to measure that in the moment. And I'm going to talk to you about how you can do that. So there's 2 different metrics that we like to look at, or buckets that I like to dump them in. One is direct ROI, that's everybody's favorite. The other is brand building. Both are very important. So let me start with brand building. Brand building is the long game goal here. And it would be very short-sighted of small business to say, I have to put all my effort, 100% of my effort into direct ROI, because that's just constantly going after the low-hanging fruit, and eventually that dries up. Brand building, if done right, is going to really pay off for you in 12 to 18 months, and your life is going to get a lot easier as your brand awareness increases. So the question becomes, how do I measure brand building? Well, let me just jump over here. Okay. So, excuse me. So you measure brand building in a couple ways. Now, none of us are Nielsen, or Coca-Cola are that big. So usually those big organizations have what's called the Nielsen report, where they can pay $10,000 and they can do a survey around the nation and see how their brand is being perceived. We're not going to do that. It doesn't make any sense. But what we will do is we can use some of the tools at our disposal, like our email list or our social media following. My company uses a program called Sprout Social. It's like Hootsuite on steroids. And we're able to run a significant amount of reports, from engagement to followers to the demographic of followers to how our stats on social media look against the competition. And we can benchmark that and set goals month over month to tell if our brand is being talked about more, if we're getting greater engagement, if we're getting more followers. So things like website hits are also a great way to measure brand building over time. On the other side of that is direct ROI, which I'm going to explain in the next slide, but I'm going to pause for a second.
Yeah, so Rachel, do me a favor and go back to the communication plan triangle. And what I want to say about this is, you talked at the beginning, the goal might be to increase your revenue by 10%. Well, this goal pyramid, if you turn it upside down, becomes your sales funnel. So all those short-term goals will ultimately become actions and behaviors that are filling the top of your sales funnel. And part of all of this planning is determining what does it actually take to create a 10% increase. You can grow too fast, and your operations and your finance may not support your growth. So it has to be a balanced approach to business growth and revenue growth. And I think that, the KPIs are really important, and they have to be measured. And I think that, when you set out to create an increase that's a percentage, you have to ultimately, as part of your marketing, your operations, and your finance plan, is you have to break that down into, well, what does that mean? If that's $500,000, how many clients do I need? What's my close ratio? So how many opportunities do I need? So ultimately, this pyramid gets flipped into your sales funnel.
That's actually a great segue to my next slide. Thank you, Donna. So here's an example of a sales. So the direct ROI that I was just talking about so before we were talking about setting metrics for brand building, here I want to talk to you about setting metrics for KPIs for the direct ROI. So this is a total example. The numbers are not really relevant. I just kind of made them up. But it helps you understand the concept. So if we know that we want to bring in $100,000 in a year and one client equals $5,000 in revenue, that can help us figure out the actions we need to take and back out in order to achieve that. So let's say we're going to spend, I talked about you needing 9 to 13 touches to engage your audience. So this is something that a marketing funnel might look like. So for our clients, we build multiple marketing funnels over time for multiple target audiences based on their goals. That's literally what we do when we're executing a marketing strategy. And then we measure the results afterwards and adjust as needed. And we start to layer them. So ultimately, your communications plan is going to have multiple marketing funnels. And I don't want you to be overwhelmed because you can start with one, and then when you perfect that one, you add the second. And then when you perfect that one, you add the third. So as an example, let's say we have to spend $2,000 on Facebook in order to get 50 webinar registrants. See, all of you are in our marketing funnel right now. No. Okay, so to get 50 webinar registrants. And then we can assume that we know from past data, or we don't, we're trying to find out, that we get 5 consults from those registrants. And then 5 consults turns into 2 clients, which is $10,000, and our acquisition's 40%. And then we know that if we repeat this same campaign 10 times, we will then get the revenue goals that we want. Now, of course, things change. You don't always hit it out of the park. Sometimes you get way more than you expected, but you need to execute these funnels a little bit differently a couple times in order to perfect it. And then you can start setting KPIs and say, if I know if I spend $2,000 on Facebook, at the end of that, I'm going to get $10,000 in client revenue. Anything to add to that, Donna?
Yes, and I think that one of the things I want you to focus on, and we talked about at the beginning, is, on here you've got a 40% acquisition, and that I think is a realistic KPI and a realistic goal for what your conversion rate should be. And similarly, 2 other points is sometimes when you have different sources of leads, you right size how you respond to them, and sometimes how you respond to leads that are kind of lukewarm. And Rachel, in the course we talk about how to talk to people at different points in the funnel, but you could set up automatic messaging, which also supports your 7 to 13 touches or whatever it is. But you also talked about adding additional initiatives, and sometimes adding those additional initiatives is cross-purposing some of what you're already doing. So it's not that we always have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes it's leveraging what we're already doing into something else.
Exactly. Like we'll probably turn this webinar into a download tool and running ads for people to download the tool, and then they'll get entered into a drip campaign. So there's multiple things you can cross-leverage this content for.
Right.
Okay, so the question becomes, if I'm going to have multiple funnels over time and I've got all these different communication outlets, how do I organize this data? So this is kind of the essence of the plan. So what we want to do is outline, this is just an example, but we want to outline all of the outlets that we're going to utilize. And remember, we pulled that data from the interviews we did. Then we want to talk about all the content that we're going to share in those outlets. And then we want to talk about the frequency in which we're going to communicate into those outlets. Now, this only has 5 examples here, but this plan could have 20, it could have 50, it could have 10. It depends on your company and it also depends on your budget. Maybe you're not prepared yet to run ads, or maybe you are, and that's okay. You start where you can, you start with what resources you have, and then you expand upon them as you grow. That's why this plan is ever changing, because we want to constantly improve it and expand on it. So we take this plan then, and if there's 50 rows, it becomes hard to reference. So we like to break it out into a timeline. So I like to break it out by week. This isn't just a general example, but going back, so if you look here, you've got your word of mouth reputation, for example. And then assume that it says, instead of pre-event marketing, it says mouth reputation. So you put as the lead, like as the heading, the outlet, and then you put all of the communications that you're going to execute under it, and then you organize it by date. And the reason this becomes really valuable is if you have support people in your company or you have a strategic partner, you can literally look at it and say, oh, it's May 14th. I'm supposed to be doing this. In fact, Donna and I, like when we team up on communication strategies, we do this, and it makes it really easy because we can hand it to our team and say, hey, this is what you're supposed to be doing this week.
Right. And to pause there, again, just to reiterate, these are tools that when you know how to use them, they make the job so much easier, but they might look a little overwhelming. So trust me, part of what we would do through this marketing course is to help you use them. But, and also just, obviously the green tint is the timeline. And as Rachel said, when you're using these tools, it helps you to lead your people. And the truth is, if you don't have people, you're going to need people to get this done. This is not a solo effort. It's not, you have to be able to find the resources to outsource some of this work because it just won't make sense for you to do all of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we've got our timeline here. We've got our plan here with outlining each item. So it's really taking the same content and reorganizing it in multiple ways to be conceptualized. And now what we like to do, and this is an example from a couple years ago, but break it down into a monthly calendar. So assume, as Donna said, you might not have the people yet, but this one is specifically for social media posting. You can have a monthly calendar specifically for email communications, or a monthly calendar specifically for ad communication. Or anything else. And each of the outlets you can have a different monthly calendar for. You can also combine it if that makes sense to you. But for example, here I can literally hand this to my social media person and say, hey, here's what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and what you need to be posting about. So this is just breaking it down to an even more granular level so that you can hand it off.
Right, and I also want you to notice that it looks like a lot of content and a lot of information, but some of it's just a theme. If you look at, Facebook and LinkedIn, on Mondays we're always doing hot topics, and so it looks like a lot, but there's a theme here that gets repeated over time, again, in line with the 7 to 13 touch points.
Exactly, and once you do one of these calendars, we will use this template to do September's, and then we'll use it to do October.
Exactly.
So, the first time is a little bit more work, and then after that it becomes easier.
Agreed.
Okay, so the final thoughts, going way back to that Forbes article about why businesses fail, every one of those challenges is answered in the development of your marketing plan. So it's talking about getting in touch with customers through dialogue, identifying your differentiating concept, and making sure you're communicating the right message to the right audience in a way that it will resonate with them through the right outlets. Okay, so I know this was a ton of information. We actually, Donna and I are putting together a 4-month series that's going to allow us to go over this entire presentation and hold, everybody who joins the series, we're going to hold your hand and we're going to develop this plan 1 week at a time together.
Right. And before we kind of wrap up, and this might lead into it, but I really want to go to the audience, and I want to go to some of these questions we have. Rachel, do you want to do that now, or do you want to do it after you talk about the Smart Marketing course?
No, we can go to it now.
Okay, great. Excellent. So, Rachel, I have a few questions here, and again, I've been monitoring the chat window, so feel free to type in more questions. We've got a few minutes left. We'll cover what we can. But your 3 steps to a smart marketing plan were audience, message, and communication plan. So first of all, as far as the audience goes, can you talk to us a little bit about, we know the difference between target market and niche marketing, but how does that play into knowing the DNA, and how does that play into this marketing plan?
That's a great question. So the answer, you're going to probably hear this a lot from me, is it varies. So if really the best thing to do in your first exercise with talking to your audience is look in your company. Let's assume for a second that you know that you have 5 ideal clients. And in a perfect world, if you could duplicate those 5 clients over and over again, you would be a very happy person. The best thing to do is start your interview process with those clients and understand their buying behaviors and their triggers. Mm-hmm. If you are exploring a new market, it becomes a little more challenging because you want to identify that target audience, take a look at it, and try to reach out to people in that specific audience. So you have to repeat the exercise, the customer interview exercise, multiple times, depending on the different audiences that you're going after.
Got it. Okay, because I'm always talking to people about, and you're right, because if you're analyzing your top 5 clients, that's probably going to the information that's going to come out from that more than likely will be a niche of some sort, because for all of us it's easier to have impact in a smaller target market, and I say this all the time when I meet people and they say their target market is small and medium-sized businesses. I always say that's like trying to boil the ocean and you really can't do it effectively. Okay, so we talked about messaging. The thing that people are always asking me is, what channels should I be using to deliver my message via? So I know there's going to be an it depends preface to your answer,
yeah,
but talk to us a little bit about channels.
So small and mid-sized businesses, the low-hanging fruit is digital channels because it's much more affordable. So social media, email marketing, website marketing, those are usually tools that are at the disposal of small and mid-sized businesses. You can certainly expand to, direct mailers, traditional advertising, ad buys, SEO, pay-per-click, and you do, as you grow, want to expand out into those areas. However, the answer to that question really comes down to who is your audience and where are they hanging out. For example, if you're working with general small business owners, LinkedIn might be a great place to be. We have a client that is trying to target facility managers of very large corporations, and the challenge is those people are not on LinkedIn. So we have to go somewhere else. So the communication outlets depends on who the target audience is and where they're hanging out. And that type of information is uncovered in your research process.
Got it. Okay, my last question, and then if anyone in the audience has questions, they can type them into the chat window. The thing that I think is so important whenever you're building a marketing strategy and then, of course, executing on it is, how do you measure, and you talked about this a bit, but I think it's worth revisiting. How do we measure return on investment? How do we know in the overall scheme of putting all the time and effort and resources into this, what type of return should we be looking for, and what are some of the maybe not so obvious key performance indicators, KPIs, that we should be watching to know what's working?
Mm-hmm. So again, going back to those 2 buckets I discussed, so I'm going to touch upon brand building first. Some great KPIs to measure on if your brand is starting to get traction is your following on social media, your engagement rate. We like to track our email list growing, but making sure that's qualified leads. So we don't, every couple months or every month we kind of purge our email list from emails that are bouncing. So if the email list is growing with quality leads, that's a great indicator. Also, website hits. How long are people coming to your website? I'm sorry, how many people are coming to your website? How long are they coming to your website? How are they interacting with your website? That's all really basic KPI data that we can start to measure and benchmark over time to see if our brand is starting to create greater engagement. On the direct return side, it varies depending on the size of the product. The size of your sale. If your average sale is $100,000, the ROI expectations are going to be very different than if your average sale is $10. So that's really dependent on. We would really have to sit down with your financial team and understand the margins and agree to an appropriate metric. However, over time, you really do want to start measuring, what am I putting into marketing and how much is it costing me, and what are the leads and the close rate and the sales generating from those marketing activities. And what we find is, I showed you an example of one sales funnel. One funnel might be producing 80% of your sales, and then we have to decide, well, does it make sense to only focus on that funnel, or do we want to diversify it? So as you start paying attention and tracking the data, It takes about 12 months to really start being able to say, this is how much I put into it in dollars and cents, and this is how much came out. But that number, that time frame really depends on your sales cycle.
And I just have to repeat that because I think you're 100% right that when you create and execute on a marketing strategy, it's not something that happens and you see results in a quarter. You're saying 12 months. I think that's probably realistic. And so before our time runs out, I want to have you talk to us about the marketing program. But the thing is, what we do when we're doing things right is we build systems that are replicatable, that allow us to scale. And so tell our audience about our Smart Marketing program and how it plays into what you do today and what you could do 3 years from now or 5 years from now.
Sure. I'm just getting to the slide. I had some technical issues. Hold on, let me open up. Sorry, give me a second. There we go. So the Smart Marketing program is a 3-month course, a 4-month course that we put together. Every time I present a presentation like this, it becomes very overwhelming. And the reason being is because a marketing plan is not something that's easy to put together. There's a lot of things that go into it. There's a lot of data that has to be collected. There's a lot of just intrinsic knowledge that comes out as you're putting it together. Me and my team have put together hundreds of marketing plans. If you're going to hire a professional marketing agency, it can cost you anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000 to get a plan put together, which is usually outside of the budget for a lot of small businesses. The other challenge with that is a marketing plan is organic and ever changing. So it's only really valid for about a year, maybe 2 if you're lucky, because as the market changes, you need to pivot appropriately. So what we really want to do is in the spirit of collaboration, as Donna would say, we have created this 4-month series where we will hold your hand and show you our process to putting a marketing plan together, and step by step, class by class and webinar by webinar, we will put a plan together that's customized to your business. And the reason that that is helpful is not only will you walk away with a written, quality, data-driven marketing plan, but you'll walk away with the knowledge of how to do it again and again and again yourself. So you won't need to come back for help. You'll have the power to recreate this in the future. And more importantly, when you put the plan together yourself, you're more empowered to execute it efficiently because you understand the ins and outs of the plans and the goals of the plan, so you know the best way to execute it. Another challenge that a lot of our clients have is if we hand them this plan because they didn't put it together, sometimes they're a little bit overwhelmed as to how to effectively execute it. But that would be eliminated if you are the one putting this plan together. So we have this course starting August 16th is going to be the first course date.
I believe you meant April.
I'm sorry, April 16th. I'm already thinking about the summer. Thank you, Donna. April 16th is the first date. It's a hybrid of in-class, in-person courses, a couple webinars, and then of course you already have access to one of 3 marketing strategists along the way for support as you put this plan together.
Right, right. And I think it's great because, you know, I'm thrilled to be working with Rachel. It's our combined expertise, her team. This is their core expertise. And it is developing a skill set that you will be able to use going forward. You know, I often say that when I opened my company, before I opened it, I took a 6-month course on how to write a business plan. I did that somewhat begrudgingly because I had to raise a fair amount of money, but it's a skill that has served me so well through all of my 25 years in business. So that's why I'm happy to be doing this with Rachel, because I believe in that skill building component. So it may be you as the business owner, or it may be someone on your team. It doesn't necessarily have to be you, but I think it's a skill that that your company will benefit from immensely. So Rachel, what next for our audience?
Well, if you have additional questions, you are more than welcome to email either me or Donna directly. I'm going to switch slides so you can see our email address here. We're always happy to answer them. You can also go to our website and under under events, you can register for the course. We're actually looking for people to apply. So it's a very quick The reason being is because you need a general level of understanding in order to make this course effective, and there's commitment from both ends to make sure that when you walk away from this, you have something concrete that is going to benefit your business and its growth. So if you go to our website under resources and then events, you can apply for the course.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We will kind of follow up with an email so you have links to what it is we've mentioned here. Rachel, as always, I learn something every time I spend a little bit of time with you, so I thank you for collaborating on this with us.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.